Emma Peterson stood behind the mahogany counter of her antique shop, carefully polishing a Victorian silver mirror with an intricate floral pattern etched around its edges. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Peterson's treasures, casting dancing shadows across the carefully arranged displays of furniture, jewelry, and curiosities that filled every corner of the shop. At 52, Emma had run this antique business for nearly 15 years, ever since she inherited it from her late father following his sudden heart attack. The shop occupied a prime location on Main Street in downtown Millbrook, a picturesque New England town of about 8,000 residents. The building itself was a testament to the area's rich history. Constructed in 1887 with original brick walls, hardwood floors, and pressed tin ceilings that Emma had lovingly restored over the years. Few people in Millbrook knew about Emma's previous career. To most of her customers and neighbors, she was simply the knowledgeable antique dealer who had taken over her family's business. What they didn't see was the doctoral degree in archaeology hanging in a frame in her apartment upstairs, or the boxes of academic journals and research papers stored in her basement. 20 years ago, Dr. Emma Peterson had been a rising star in the field of archaeology. She had specialized in Native American civilizations of the Southwest, earning her doctorate from Yale University with a dissertation on trade networks among ancestral Puebloan communities. Her early career had been marked by successful excavations, groundbreaking research, and a teaching position at a prestigious university. But all of that ended with one terrible day in the summer of 2005. Emma had been leading an excavation at a significant ancestral Puebloan site in Arizona, working under a grant from the National Science Foundation. The site was yielding extraordinary artifacts that were reshaping understanding of the region's pre-Columbian history. The disaster happened on a Tuesday morning in July. A graduate student named David Chen, eager but inexperienced, had been working alone in a sensitive area of the site. Despite explicit instructions to wait for supervision, he had attempted to extract what appeared to be a complete ceremonial vessel. The ancient ceramic cracked and partially crumbled as he lifted it. Emma took full responsibility for the incident. As the principal investigator, the supervision of her team was ultimately her responsibility. The story quickly spread beyond the archaeological community. Native American rights organizations criticized the incident as another example of academic carelessness with indigenous cultural heritage. Emma found herself at the center of a firestorm. The university administration, seeking to protect their relationships, quietly pressured Emma to step down from her position. Other universities were reluctant to hire someone associated with such a high-profile incident. Research grants dried up. The archaeological community that had once embraced her now seemed to view her as a liability. Unable to handle the constant criticism, Emma made the painful decision to leave academia entirely. She resigned from her university position and returned to Millbrook to help her aging father run the family antique business. It was meant to be a temporary retreat, but Emma never returned to archaeology. The years passed quietly in Millbrook, and Emma gradually built a new life around antiques and historical objects. She discovered that many of the skills she had developed as an archaeologist translated well to the antique business. She developed a reputation for expertise and honesty that attracted customers from throughout the region. Still, there were days when Emma felt the weight of her lost career pressing down on her. She would see archaeological discoveries in the news or receive invitations to professional conferences that she couldn't bring herself to attend. On this particular October afternoon, as Emma watched the leaves fall outside her shop window, she was thinking about all of this history. The anniversary of the Arizona incident was approaching, and she always found herself more reflective during this time of year. The shop bell chimed, interrupting Emma's melancholy thoughts. She turned to see an elderly woman entering, moving slowly with the help of an elegant wooden walking stick. The woman appeared to be in her 80s, with snow-white hair pulled back in a neat bun and intelligent blue eyes. "Good afternoon," the woman said, with a voice that carried traces of an educated New England accent. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I'm Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell." Emma moved from behind the counter with a welcoming smile. "Not at all, Mrs. Hartwell. I'm Emma Peterson. Please, come in and have a seat." Mrs. Hartwell made her way carefully to the comfortable leather chair Emma kept near the counter for elderly customers. "Thank you, dear. I understand you purchase estate items and antiques." "Yes, I do," Emma replied. "Are you looking to sell some family pieces?" "Indeed, I am." Mrs. Hartwell's eyes twinkled with what might have been mischief. "I'm moving to an assisted living facility next month. At 86, I'm finding it increasingly difficult to maintain my house and all the belongings I've accumulated over the years." Emma nodded sympathetically. She had worked with many families in similar situations and understood the emotional complexity of letting go of treasured possessions. "That must be a difficult transition. What kind of items were you hoping to sell?" Mrs. Hartwell opened her leather satchel and began removing objects one by one, placing them carefully on the small table between their chairs. Emma's interest was immediately piqued. These were not typical household items. The first item was a brass compass, beautifully crafted with intricate engravings around its edge. The compass appeared to be quite old, possibly from the mid-1800s, and was in excellent condition. Next came a collection of sepia-toned photographs mounted on thick cardboard backing. Emma could see they depicted what appeared to be exploration or surveying expeditions. Groups of men with surveying equipment, wilderness camps, and landscape views. Mrs. Hartwell then produced what appeared to be a leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth by age and handling. The brass clasp was green with patina. "These belong to my great-grandfather, Captain William Hartwell," Mrs. Hartwell explained. "He was quite the adventurer back in his day, an explorer and surveyor who spent most of his adult life mapping the wilderness areas of this region." Emma's pulse quickened slightly. As an archaeologist, she had always been fascinated by early exploration and surveying records. "How fascinating. Do you know much about his work?" "Oh, yes, dear. Great-grandfather was something of a legend in our family. He lived from 1798 to 1882 and spent nearly 60 years exploring the mountains and forests of New England. The family always said he was searching for something specific, though no one was ever quite sure what." Mrs. Hartwell reached into her satchel once more and produced the item that would change Emma's life forever. A rolled piece of aged paper tied with a faded silk ribbon. "This is probably the most interesting piece. Great-grandfather's map." Emma's breath caught in her throat as Mrs. Hartwell carefully untied the ribbon and began to unroll what was obviously a hand-drawn map. Even from across the table, Emma could see the distinctive characteristics of 19th century cartography. "Great-grandfather always claimed this map showed the location of something extraordinary," Mrs. Hartwell continued, fully spreading the map on the table. "He spent years creating it, adding details from his various expeditions. But the family never took his stories too seriously." Emma leaned forward to examine the map more closely, her archaeological training immediately taking over. The document was remarkable in its detail and apparent authenticity. The paper was definitely old, and the drawing showed topographical features with a level of accuracy that suggested extensive fieldwork. "Mrs. Hartwell," Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady, "do you know what geographical area this map represents?" "Oh, yes, dear. It's definitely this region. The area around Millbrook and extending into the state forest lands to the north and east. Great-grandfather lived here his entire adult life and spent decades exploring every square mile of the surrounding wilderness. Emma studied the map with increasing fascination. She could identify several landmarks that were still recognizable today. But what truly captured Emma's attention were the numerous symbols scattered across the map that didn't correspond to standard surveying notation. Some appeared to be Native American in origin, while others looked European. Most intriguing of all was a complex cluster of symbols in an area that Emma estimated to be about 12 miles northeast of Millbrook, in what was now part of the State Forest Preserve. The symbols included what appeared to be cave entrances, underground passages, and markings that might indicate the presence of artifacts. "Mrs. Hartwell," Emma said, her excitement barely contained, "has anyone ever tried to follow this map or investigate the locations it shows?" The elderly woman chuckled softly. "Oh, a few family members tried over the years, but nobody ever found anything significant. My father and his brothers spent several summers in the 1920s tramping through the woods. All they found were a few old campsites and some unremarkable caves." Emma's pulse was racing now. Her archaeological instincts were screaming that this map represented something potentially significant. The combination of Native American and European symbols suggested possible cultural interaction sites, which were always of tremendous historical importance. "Would you be willing to sell this entire collection?" Emma asked, working hard to keep her voice casual. "That's exactly what I was hoping for, dear. I'd hate to see these items separated. They belong together as a record of great-grandfather's life work." Emma and Mrs. Hartwell negotiated a fair price for the entire collection. After Mrs. Hartwell left, Emma locked the front door of the shop and flipped the sign to closed, even though it was only mid-afternoon. Emma spread the map on the large work table in her back room and turned on her brightest lamp. The more she studied the map, the more convinced she became that it represented something extraordinary. Captain William Hartwell had clearly possessed extensive knowledge of the local geography, and his documentation showed a level of detail that suggested years of careful observation. But what excited Emma most were the symbols that had no place in standard 19th century surveying practices. These markings suggested that Hartwell had encountered evidence of earlier human activity, possibly both Native American sites and traces of even earlier European exploration. Emma photographed the map from multiple angles and spent the rest of the afternoon comparing Hartwell's map to modern topographical surveys and satellite imagery of the region. The correlation was remarkable. Despite the passage of nearly 2 centuries, Emma was able to match most of Hartwell's geographical features to current landmarks. As the sun set outside her shop windows, Emma realized she was facing a decision that could change her life once again. She could treat this map as simply another antique, or she could do what every instinct in her body was telling her to do: investigate it as if she were still an archaeologist. The thought both terrified and thrilled her. Emma hadn't done any field work in 20 years. But looking at this map, feeling the familiar excitement of potential discovery, she realized how much she had missed the work that had once defined her life. Emma knew there was only one person she could trust to help her make sense of this situation. With trembling fingers, she reached for her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in over 2 years. Dr. Thomas Bradley answered his phone on the 3rd ring, his familiar voice carrying the slight note of distraction that Emma remembered from their university days. "Tom Bradley here," he said in his characteristic direct manner. "Tom, it's Emma Peterson." There was a moment of surprised silence before Tom's voice warmed considerably. "Emma, what a wonderful surprise. It's been far too long. How are you doing?" Emma smiled at the genuine pleasure in his voice. Tom had been one of the few people who had continued to reach out to her after the Arizona incident. Their friendship dated back to their graduate school days at Yale, where they had been part of a close-knit group of archaeology students. "I'm doing well, Tom. I'm sorry I haven't been better about staying in touch. Life in the antique business keeps me busy, but that's not really an excuse. No apologies necessary, Tom replied warmly. I understand that you needed space to build a new life, but I have to say I've missed our conversations. Emma laughed, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. Well, I actually might need both archaeological and antique expertise for something I've stumbled across. Tom, I think I may have discovered something that could be archaeologically significant, and I need advice from someone I trust. Now, that sounds intriguing, Tom said. What have you found? Emma described the afternoon's events, from Mrs. Hartwell's visit to her examination of Captain William Hartwell's map and associated materials. She explained about the correlation between the historical map and modern geographical features, and about the mysterious symbols that suggested possible archaeological sites. Emma, this sounds remarkable, Tom said when she finished. Can you send me photographs of the map? I'd love to examine it more closely. I was hoping you'd say that, Emma replied, already turning to her computer. I'm sending them now. While Tom examined the digital images, Emma filled him in on her research into Captain William Hartwell. She had spent part of the evening searching through online historical archives and had discovered that Hartwell was indeed a documented figure in the region's 19th century history. According to what I've found, Emma explained, Hartwell worked on several government surveying projects in the 1820s and 1830s, but he also conducted extensive independent exploration throughout the region. He published a few articles in early scientific journals describing unusual geological formations and what he called evidence of ancient habitation in the wilderness areas. Emma, these photographs are extraordinary, Tom interrupted. I'm looking at the symbols you mentioned, and some of them are definitely consistent with Native American petroglyphs we've documented in other parts of New England. But you're right about the mixture of cultural influences. Tom paused, and Emma could hear him typing. I'm sending these images to Dr. Sarah Running Bear. Do you remember her? She's now one of the leading experts on indigenous archaeology in the Northeast, and she specializes in cultural interaction sites from the historic period. Emma did remember Sarah, though they had never worked together directly. Dr. Sarah Running Bear was a respected archaeologist and member of the Abenaki Nation, who had built a distinguished career studying Native American communities in New England. What do you think, Tom? Emma asked. Is this worth investigating, or am I letting my imagination run away with me? Emma, based on what I'm seeing here, I think this could be very significant. The level of detail in Hartwell's mapping suggests he spent considerable time in these areas and had access to local knowledge, possibly from Native American guides. The symbols indicating cave systems are particularly interesting because caves were often used by indigenous peoples for ceremonial purposes. Tom's enthusiasm was infectious, and Emma found herself feeling more excited about archaeological research than she had in 20 years. But beneath the excitement was anxiety. Tom, what if we investigate this and find something important, and I mess it up again? What if I make another mistake that damages irreplaceable cultural heritage? Tom's voice became gentle but firm. Emma, what happened in Arizona was 20 years ago. You were supervising a large team under enormous pressure, and accidents happen even to the most careful archaeologists. You've had 20 years to think about that experience and learn from it. You're older now, more experienced, and much more cautious than you were when you were trying to establish your career. But the academic community might not be willing to accept anything I'm involved in, Emma protested. Emma, listen to me, Tom interrupted. Your reputation in the academic community is based on one incident from 2 decades ago. The people who still hold that against you aren't worth worrying about. The field has moved forward, and there's much more emphasis now on collaborative approaches and cultural sensitivity. Exactly the kind of approach you would bring to a project like this. Emma was quiet for a moment, absorbing Tom's words. What would we need to do this properly? First, we'd need to obtain research permits from the State Forest Service. Then, we'd need to contact the relevant tribal cultural offices to inform them of our intentions and invite their participation. If we're dealing with potential Native American sites, it's absolutely essential that we involve tribal representatives from the beginning. Emma nodded. This was exactly the kind of collaborative approach that had been lacking in some of her earlier work. We'd also need equipment for a preliminary survey, Tom continued. GPS units for accurate mapping, metal detectors for locating buried artifacts, and ideally access to ground-penetrating radar. But let's start with a basic reconnaissance to see if there's anything there at all. And if we actually find evidence of archaeological sites, then we'd need a full archaeological team, proper documentation specialists, and safety equipment for cave exploration if that's what we're dealing with. But Emma, let's not get ahead of ourselves. The first step is simply to visit the area indicated on the map and see if we can locate any of the features Hartwell documented. Emma felt a mixture of excitement and terror at the prospect of returning to fieldwork. Tom, I have to admit that I'm scared. What if I can't do this kind of work anymore? What if 20 years away from archaeology have made me incompetent in the field? Emma, archaeology isn't just about technical skills. It's about observation, analysis, and problem solving. You've been doing all of those things in your antique work for the past 15 years. You've been researching provenance, identifying historical periods, and understanding cultural contexts. Those are exactly the skills that make a good archaeologist. Tom paused, and when he continued, his voice was warm with affection. Besides, you're not doing this alone. I'd be honored to work with you on this project, Emma. We made a good team in graduate school, and I think we could make an even better team now. Emma felt tears forming in her eyes. She had forgotten how much she valued Tom's friendship and professional respect. You really think this is worth pursuing? I think this could be the most significant historical discovery in this region in decades, Tom replied without hesitation. And I think you're exactly the right person to lead this investigation. Emma made her decision. All right, Tom, let's do this. But let's do it right from the very beginning. Absolutely. I'll start working on the permits and tribal contacts tomorrow. Can you clear some time in the next few weeks for an initial site visit? Emma looked around her antique shop, filled with objects from the past that people had treasured, lost, and rediscovered. For the first time in 20 years, she felt ready to make discoveries of her own again. Yes, she said firmly. I can clear the time. Tom, thank you for believing in this, and for believing in me. Emma, I never stopped believing in you. I'm just glad you're ready to believe in yourself again. After they hung up, Emma sat in her shop as darkness fell outside. She thought about the path that had brought her to this moment, the success and tragedy of her early career, the years of exile and healing, and now the possibility of redemption and return. She picked up Captain William Hartwell's map and studied it once more in the lamplight. Whatever secrets this document held, she was finally ready to pursue them. After 20 years of living with regret, Emma Peterson was ready to become an archaeologist again. The next morning, Emma opened her shop an hour late, having spent much of the night researching everything she could find about Captain William Hartwell. What she discovered only increased her excitement about the project. Hartwell had been born in Boston in 1798, the son of a merchant family. He had received a good education and showed early aptitude for mathematics and natural sciences. In his 20s, he had worked on several government surveying projects as the young United States attempted to map its expanding territories. But what made Hartwell particularly interesting was his documented relationships with Native American communities in the region. Emma found several references to Hartwell's work with indigenous guides and his reputation for treating Native Americans with respect, something that was unfortunately rare among explorers of his era. In 1847, Hartwell had published an article in the American Journal of Science titled Observations on the Ancient Habitations and Ceremonial Sites of the Northern New England Region. In the article, he described discovering chambers beneath the earth, carved by ancient hands, containing objects of great beauty and mystery. He had planned to return to document these discoveries more thoroughly, but Emma could find no record of him ever publishing detailed findings. Emma's phone rang as she was reading through Hartwell's scientific publications. It was Tom, calling with updates on his progress. "Good morning, Emma. I have some excellent news. I spoke with the State Forest Service this morning, and they're very interested in our project. They've been looking for opportunities to develop educational partnerships that could highlight the historical significance of the forest lands." Emma felt a surge of relief. "What kind of timeline are we looking at for permits? If we can provide a detailed research proposal and demonstrate appropriate expertise and insurance coverage, they think we could have permits approved within 2 weeks. I'm preparing the paperwork now." "And tribal contacts?" "That's where I have even better news," Tom said. "I reached out to Dr. Sarah Running Bear last night, and she's extremely interested in the project. She's driving up from Massachusetts this weekend to examine the map in person and discuss potential collaboration." Emma's pulse quickened. Sarah Running Bear was not only a respected archaeologist, but also a cultural leader within the Abenaki community. Her involvement would lend tremendous credibility to their project. "Tom, that's wonderful, but I have to ask, did you tell her about my background? About what happened in Arizona? I mentioned that you were the lead archaeologist on this project and that you had taken a break from academia to run your family's antique business. Sarah didn't ask for more details, and I didn't think it was my place to discuss your personal history." Emma appreciated Tom's discretion, but she knew that if they were going to work together, Sarah would need to know about her past. "I think I should tell her about Arizona myself. If we're going to be partners on this project, she deserves to know what she's getting into." They spent the next hour discussing logistics. Tom would handle the permit applications and coordinate with the Forest Service. Emma would continue her historical research and prepare detailed maps. Sarah would provide cultural consultation and help them understand the significance of any Native American elements they might encounter. "One more thing, Emma," Tom said as their conversation was winding down. "I think we should consider bringing in a graduate student or two to help with the field work. There are several excellent students in our program who would benefit enormously from this kind of hands-on experience." Emma's immediate reaction was anxiety. The Arizona incident had involved a graduate student making a crucial error, and the thought of supervising students again brought back uncomfortable memories. But she also recognized that excluding students would deprive them of valuable learning opportunities. "I'm open to that idea, Tom, but I want to make sure we have very clear protocols and supervision structures in place. I don't want anyone working unsupervised in sensitive areas." "Absolutely. And Emma, I think your experience makes you better qualified to mentor students in proper archaeological techniques and cultural sensitivity." That afternoon, Emma received a phone call from Dr. Sarah Running Bear. "Ms. Peterson, this is Dr. Sarah Running Bear. Tom Bradley gave me your number and told me about the map you've discovered. I hope you don't mind me calling directly." "Not at all, Dr. Running Bear. I'm honored that you're interested in the project. Please call me Sarah. And I have to say, based on the photographs Tom sent me, this could be quite significant. I've been studying Native American sites in New England for 15 years, and some of the symbols on your map are unlike anything I've encountered in this region." Emma felt a thrill of excitement mixed with nervousness. "Sarah, before we go any further, I think there's something you should know about my background. Emma took a deep breath and told Sarah about her previous career in archaeology, about the Arizona incident, and about her 20-year absence from the field. She tried to be as honest and objective as possible. Sarah listened without interruption, and when Emma finished, there was a thoughtful pause before she responded. Emma, thank you for being so straightforward about your history. I appreciate your honesty, and I want you to know that what you've described sounds like exactly the kind of learning experience that makes archaeologists better at their work. Emma blinked in surprise. I'm sorry? 20 years ago, the archaeological community was far less aware of the importance of cultural collaboration and community involvement in research. The fact that you've spent 2 decades thinking about those issues, and that you're approaching this project with such careful attention to cultural sensitivity, tells me you're exactly the kind of archaeologist we need leading this work. Emma felt a wave of relief and gratitude. That means more to me than you can imagine, Sarah. I want to drive up this weekend to examine the map in person and meet with you and Tom. Based on what I've seen in the photographs, I believe this map may document a type of cultural interaction site that we've theorized about but never actually found evidence for. What do you mean? There are historical references to places where Native American communities and early European explorers established ongoing relationships, not just brief trading encounters, but sustained cultural exchanges. These sites would have been used for meetings, ceremonies, and the sharing of knowledge between cultures. The mixed symbols on your map suggest this might be documentation of such a place. Emma's excitement was building. If Sarah was right, they might be looking at evidence of peaceful cultural cooperation rather than the conflict that characterized so much of Native American and European interaction in colonial America. Sarah, I want to make sure we do this right from the very beginning. What would proper protocol look like for investigating a site like this? First, we'd need to involve tribal cultural committees from all the indigenous nations that have historical connections to this region. We'd need to conduct ceremonies acknowledging our intentions and asking permission to explore areas that may be sacred. And we'd need to establish clear agreements about how any discoveries would be shared and preserved. Emma was impressed by Sarah's comprehensive approach. I'm completely committed to that approach. This project doesn't move forward unless we have full community support and involvement. Excellent. Then I think we can create something really special here. Not just an archaeological discovery, but a model for how historical research can be conducted in true partnership with indigenous communities. They arranged to meet that Saturday at Emma's shop. After hanging up, Emma felt a sense of possibility and excitement that she hadn't experienced in decades. Saturday morning brought crisp autumn weather and the arrival of Dr. Sarah Running Bear. Emma had been nervous about meeting such a distinguished colleague, but Sarah's warm personality and genuine enthusiasm quickly put her at ease. Sarah was in her early 40s, with long black hair that she wore in a traditional braid and intelligent dark eyes. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable in both academic and cultural settings. Emma, thank you so much for including me in this project, Sarah said as they settled around the work table where the map was displayed. Based on what Tom has told me and what I can see here, this could be groundbreaking. Sarah spent nearly an hour examining the map in detail, using a magnifying glass to study individual symbols and comparing them to references in a thick notebook she had brought. Emma and Tom watched in fascination as Sarah identified various elements of the map's symbolic language. "This is remarkable," Sarah said finally. "What you have here is essentially a bilingual document. Native American symbols and European cartographic conventions used together to record the same geographical and cultural information." What does that suggest about how the map was created? Emma asked. It suggests that Captain Hartwell was working closely with Native American guides who shared their knowledge of the region with him. But more than that, it suggests they were working together to create a record that both cultures could understand and use. Sarah pointed to a cluster of symbols in the area that had most interested Emma. These markings here indicate what we would call a council site, a place where different groups would meet for important discussions or ceremonies. The combination of symbols suggests it was used by multiple tribal groups, and possibly European visitors as well. Tom leaned in for a closer look. That would explain the mixed cultural elements we're seeing. If this was a neutral meeting ground, it would make sense that it would be marked with symbols recognizable to all the groups that used it. And these symbols here, Sarah continued, indicating a series of markings that looked like caves or underground chambers, suggest that the site included natural features that were considered sacred or significant. Caves were often used for vision quests, healing ceremonies, or as storage places for sacred objects. Emma felt her pulse quickening. Sarah, if we found a site like this, what would be the proper way to investigate it? Very carefully and with full tribal involvement every step of the way. A site like this wouldn't just be archaeologically significant, it would be spiritually and culturally significant to contemporary Native American communities. Any investigation would need to be conducted as a partnership, with tribal representatives involved in every decision. Sarah outlined a framework for cultural collaboration that went far beyond anything Emma had encountered in her previous career. They would need to present their research proposal to tribal cultural committees, participate in appropriate ceremonies, and establish clear protocols for how any discoveries would be handled, documented, and preserved. The goal wouldn't just be to excavate and catalog artifacts, Sarah explained. It would be to understand the site as a living part of cultural history and to ensure that our research contributes to contemporary Native American communities' understanding of their own heritage. Emma was deeply impressed by Sarah's approach, which balanced scientific rigor with cultural respect. Sarah, I want to learn how to do this kind of collaborative work properly. Would you be willing to mentor me in cultural protocol as we develop this project? I'd be honored to work with you, Emma. And I think this project could serve as a model for other collaborative archaeological efforts in the region. By the end of Saturday afternoon, they had developed a comprehensive research plan that included historical documentation, permit applications, tribal consultation, and preliminary field surveys. Emma felt more excited about archaeological work than she had since her graduate school days, but this time the excitement was tempered with wisdom and humility. That evening, as Tom and Sarah prepared to return to their respective homes, Emma realized that she was no longer thinking about this project as a return to her old career. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something entirely new, a way of doing archaeology that was more thoughtful, collaborative, and culturally sensitive than anything she had attempted before. Thank you both for believing in this project and for helping me figure out how to do it right, Emma said as they stood outside her shop in the gathering dusk. Thank you for trusting us with something so important to you, Sarah replied. I have a feeling this is going to be an extraordinary adventure for all of us. Tom gave Emma a warm hug. Welcome back to archaeology, Dr. Peterson. The field has missed you. As Emma watched her friends drive away, she looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the clear autumn sky. For the first time in 20 years, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Emma Peterson was ready to be an archaeologist again, but this time she was going to do it better than she ever had before. 2 weeks later, Emma stood in the parking area at the edge of the state forest, checking and rechecking her equipment while waiting for Tom and Sarah to arrive. She wore sturdy hiking boots, layered clothing suitable for a day in the woods, and carried a pack equipped with GPS units, digital cameras, notebooks, first aid supplies, and copies of Hartwell's map. Emma's nervousness was almost overwhelming. It had been 20 years since she had conducted any kind of field work, and she found herself second-guessing everything. But beneath the anxiety was a deeper current of excitement, the same feeling she had experienced as a graduate student preparing for her first major excavation. Tom arrived first, driving a Forest Service vehicle that he had borrowed for the expedition. He looked completely at ease in his field clothes, reminding Emma of their graduate school days when he had been known for his ability to remain calm and organized under any field conditions. "Good morning, Dr. Peterson," Tom said with a grin. "Ready for your return to archaeological field work?" "I think so," Emma replied, though her voice carried uncertainty. "Tom, what if I've forgotten how to do this? What if 20 years away from the field has made me incompetent at reading landscapes and identifying potential sites?" Tom put a reassuring hand on Emma's shoulder. "Emma, you've been reading landscapes and identifying historically significant objects for the past 15 years in your antique work. The skills are the same, just applied in a different context. Besides, we're not excavating anything today. We're just doing reconnaissance to see if we can locate the general area indicated on Hartwell's map." Sarah arrived a few minutes later, carrying what appeared to be a considerable amount of specialized equipment. In addition to standard hiking gear, she had brought several devices that Emma didn't recognize, along with a leather bag that she handled with particular care. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah said. "I've brought some additional tools that might be helpful, including a portable ground-penetrating radar unit and a metal detector designed for archaeological work. But before we head into the forest, I'd like to perform a brief ceremony acknowledging our intentions and asking for permission to explore." Emma and Tom exchanged glances. Neither of them had experience with indigenous spiritual practices, but both understood the importance of respecting Sarah's cultural protocols. "Of course," Emma said, "we're honored to be included in whatever ceremony you think is appropriate." Sarah opened her leather bag and removed several items: a small bundle of sage, a beautifully carved wooden bowl, and what appeared to be a piece of traditional Native American pottery. She arranged these items on a flat rock near the edge of the forest and invited Emma and Tom to join her in a circle. "This is sweetgrass and sage," Sarah explained, lighting the bundle and allowing smoke to rise into the still morning air. "We use these for purification and for carrying our prayers to the Creator. I'm going to offer a prayer asking for permission to enter this land respectfully and for guidance in our search for the places our ancestors considered sacred." Sarah spoke for several minutes in what Emma assumed was Abenaki, her voice carrying a reverent tone that conveyed the seriousness of their undertaking. When she finished, Sarah offered the smoldering sage bundle to Emma and Tom, showing them how to draw the smoke toward themselves in a gesture of purification. "Thank you for including us in that ceremony," Emma said when they had finished. "I want to make sure we approach this work with the respect and mindfulness it deserves." "I appreciate your openness," Sarah replied as she carefully packed away the ceremonial items. "Many archaeologists are uncomfortable with indigenous spiritual practices, but I believe they add an important dimension to our understanding of the places we study." With the ceremony completed, they gathered their equipment and set off into the forest. Emma had used her GIS software to calculate coordinates for the area indicated on Hartwell's map, and their first destination was a point approximately 2 miles northeast of the parking area. The forest was beautiful in its late autumn dress, with most of the leaves fallen, but enough color remaining to create a carpet of gold and red underfoot. Emma found herself falling naturally into the rhythm of fieldwork. The careful observation of terrain features, the constant awareness of their location and direction, and the collaborative problem-solving essential to successful field research. The topography here matches what I see on Hartwell's map quite well, Tom observed as they paused to check their GPS coordinates. That ridgeline to our east corresponds to these markings here, and I think this stream bed is the same one he indicated flowing northeast toward the main river. Emma was pleased to discover that her ability to read landscapes and correlate map features with actual terrain was still intact. If anything, her years of studying antique maps and historical documents had sharpened her skills in interpreting different cartographic styles. According to my calculations, we should be getting close to the area where Hartwell indicated the cave symbols, Emma said, studying both the historical map and her modern GPS unit. The cluster of markings should be somewhere within about a quarter mile of our current position. They spread out slightly, staying within voice contact, but covering more ground as they searched for any signs of the features documented on Hartwell's map. Emma found herself moving with growing confidence through the forest, her old instincts for field observation reasserting themselves as she scanned the landscape for unusual rock formations, changes in vegetation, or other indicators of potential archaeological sites. It was Sarah who made the first significant discovery. About 20 minutes after they had begun their systematic search of the target area, she called out from a position roughly 50 yards to the north. "Emma, Tom? I think you need to see this." Emma and Tom quickly made their way to where Sarah was standing near the base of a small hill covered with dense vegetation. At first glance, Emma couldn't see anything unusual about the location, but as Sarah pointed out specific features, a pattern began to emerge. "Look at the way these boulders are arranged," Sarah said, indicating a series of large rocks that Emma had initially assumed were naturally placed. "They're too regular to be coincidental, and see how they form a sort of pathway leading up the slope." Emma studied the boulder arrangement more carefully and realized that Sarah was right. The rocks appeared to have been deliberately placed to create a trail or approach to something higher up the hillside. The arrangement was subtle enough that it might easily be missed by casual hikers, but clear enough to be recognizable to anyone who knew what to look for. "And look at this," Sarah continued, leading them closer to one of the largest boulders. "There are markings carved into the rock surface." Emma's heart rate increased as she examined the boulder Sarah was indicating. Carved into the granite surface were several symbols that looked very similar to some of the markings they had seen on Hartwell's map. The carvings were weathered and partially obscured by lichen growth, but clearly visible once you knew where to look. "These are definitely human-made," Tom said, photographing the markings from multiple angles. "And they look old, probably pre-contact based on the style and weathering patterns." Emma compared the carved symbols to her copy of Hartwell's map. "These match several of the markings he documented in this area. Tom, I think we may have found the approach to the site he was trying to map." Following the boulder pathway up the hillside, they discovered additional evidence of human modification of the landscape. The trail led through what appeared to be a natural gap between rock formations, but closer examination revealed that the gap had been enlarged and shaped by deliberate removal of smaller rocks and vegetation. "This is starting to feel like a formal approach to something important," Sarah observed. "The kind of pathway that might lead to a ceremonial site or council meeting place." The trail continued for another 100 yards up the gradually steepening slope, becoming more distinct as they climbed higher. Emma found herself increasingly excited as each new discovery confirmed that they were following in the footsteps of the people who had created Hartwell's map. "Based on our GPS readings, we should be very close to the area where Hartwell indicated the main cluster of cave symbols," Emma said as they paused to rest and consult their maps. Tom was scanning the hillside above them with binoculars. "I can see some interesting rock formations up there that might be worth investigating. There appears to be a ledge system that could potentially include cave openings." They continued climbing for another 15 minutes, following the increasingly clear trail markers. Emma's excitement was building with each step, but she was also becoming more nervous about what they might find. If they discovered significant archaeological features, it would trigger a whole new set of responsibilities and decisions about how to proceed. The trail led them to a natural terrace in the hillside, a relatively flat area about 30 feet wide that appeared to have been formed by geological processes, but modified by human activity. The terrace was sheltered by overhanging rock formations and provided an excellent view of the valley below. This would have been an ideal location for gatherings or ceremonies, Sarah noted, examining the layout of the space. Protected from weather, defensible, and with good sight lines in all directions. Emma was studying the rock formations that formed the back wall of the terrace when she noticed something that made her catch her breath. Behind a screen of small trees and thick vegetation, there appeared to be dark openings in the cliff face. "Sarah, Tom, look at this," Emma called softly, her voice tight with excitement. As they pushed through the vegetation screen, the opening became clearly visible. It was unmistakably a cave entrance, roughly oval in shape, and large enough for a person to enter comfortably. But what made Emma's hands shake as she reached for her camera were the symbols carved into the rock around the entrance. The petroglyphs were more elaborate and better preserved than anything they had seen on the approach trail. Spirals, geometric patterns, and what appeared to be animal figures covered the rock surfaces on both sides of the cave opening. Some of the symbols looked Native American in origin, while others appeared to be European-style markings. "Emma, this is extraordinary," Tom whispered, as if speaking too loudly might somehow disturb the ancient site. "These carvings represent multiple cultural traditions and probably multiple time periods." Sarah was examining the symbols with intense concentration, occasionally referring to notes in her field book. Some of these petroglyphs are definitely traditional Abenaki symbols. This spiral here represents the cycle of seasons, and these marks indicate a sacred site. But you're right about the mixed cultural elements. There are markings here that I don't recognize from traditional indigenous iconography. Emma was photographing every detail of the cave entrance and its surrounding carvings, but part of her mind was already racing ahead to the implications of their discovery. If this cave contained the kind of artifacts and cultural evidence that Hartwell had hinted at in his writings, they were looking at a find of enormous historical significance. "What do we do now?" Emma asked, looking to her partners for guidance. "Now we document everything we can see from the outside, and then we go back and assemble a proper cave exploration team," Tom replied. "Emma, this is too important to rush. We need proper lighting, safety equipment, and documentation protocols before we go any further." Sarah nodded in agreement. "And we need to contact the tribal cultural committees immediately. If this is the kind of sacred site I think it might be, there are specific protocols that need to be followed before any exploration can take place." Emma felt a mixture of excitement and impatience as they spent the next hour carefully documenting the exterior of the cave and its surrounding features. Every instinct told her that they had found something extraordinary, but her hard-won wisdom reminded her that the most important discoveries required the most careful handling. As they prepared to leave the site and return to town, Emma took one last look at the cave entrance with its mysterious symbols and hidden depths. After 20 years away from archaeology, she had rediscovered her passion for the field by finding evidence of cross-cultural collaboration and respectful exploration from nearly 2 centuries ago. "Thank you," she whispered to the site itself, to Captain William Hartwell and his Native American collaborators, and to whatever forces had led her back to the work she was meant to do. The real exploration was still to come, but Emma Peterson had already found what she had been searching for without knowing it: a way back to herself and to the work that gave her life meaning. The drive back to Millbrook was filled with excited conversation as Emma, Tom, and Sarah processed what they had discovered. Emma found herself experiencing a combination of emotions she hadn't felt in 20 years. The thrill of significant discovery mixed with the weight of responsibility that came with finding something that could reshape understanding of the region's cultural history. I think we need to step back and make sure we're handling this properly from every angle, Emma said as they reached the edge of town. Sarah, what's the protocol for involving tribal communities in a discovery like this? I need to contact the cultural committees immediately and arrange for elders and spiritual leaders to visit the site before we do any exploration of the cave interior, Sarah replied. There may need to be specific ceremonies or blessings before anyone enters what could be a sacred space. Tom was already thinking about the logistical challenges of mounting a proper archaeological expedition. We're going to need specialized equipment for cave exploration, proper lighting systems, safety ropes, air quality monitors, and documentation equipment designed for underground work. We'll also need to expand our team to include people with spelunking experience. Emma felt slightly overwhelmed by the complexity of what lay ahead, but also energized by the challenge. How long do you think it will take to organize everything properly? If we want to do this right, probably at least 2 or 3 weeks, Tom replied. But Emma, that's a good thing. Rushing this kind of investigation is exactly how important sites get damaged or cultural protocols get violated. That evening, Emma sat in her apartment above the antique shop, reviewing the photographs they had taken and trying to process the magnitude of what was happening to her life. 6 weeks ago, her biggest concern had been organizing an estate sale for a local family. Now she was potentially on the verge of making one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in New England's recent history. The next morning brought a phone call from Sarah with updates on her consultations with tribal cultural committees. The news was encouraging, but also added new layers of complexity to their project. I've spoken with elders from 3 different tribal nations, and there's tremendous excitement about the possibility of rediscovering a site that appears in our oral histories, Sarah reported. But there's also concern about ensuring that any exploration is conducted with appropriate spiritual preparation and cultural oversight. What does that mean in practical terms? Emma asked. It means we'll need to participate in traditional ceremonies before entering the cave, and we'll need to have tribal representatives present during any exploration or documentation work. It also means that if we find sacred objects or human remains, there will be specific protocols for how they're handled and where they're ultimately housed. Emma was grateful for Sarah's expertise in navigating these cultural considerations, but she was also somewhat intimidated by the level of responsibility involved. Sarah, I want to make sure I understand all these protocols properly. Would it be possible for me to meet with some of the elders you've been consulting with? Actually, that's exactly what they've requested. Elder Mary Bear Song would like to meet with you personally before giving final approval for the project. She's the keeper of many of the oral histories related to this area, and she wants to assess whether you approach this work with appropriate respect and understanding. Emma felt nervous about being evaluated by tribal elders, but she understood why such scrutiny was necessary. When can we arrange that meeting? Elder Bear Song has invited you to visit her this weekend. She lives on the reservation about 2 hours south of here, and she's offered to share some of the oral histories related to the site we think we've found. Emma spent the rest of the week preparing for her meeting with Elder Bear Song by reading extensively about Abenaki history and culture. She also worked with Tom to develop detailed documentation of their discovery. On Saturday morning, Emma drove south to the reservation where Mary Bear Song lived. The elderly woman's house was a modest ranch-style home surrounded by gardens that even in November showed evidence of careful tending. Emma was greeted at the door by a woman who appeared to be in her 70s, with long gray hair braided with colorful ribbons and eyes that seemed to take in everything about Emma in a single glance. Dr. Peterson, Mary Bear Song said in a voice that carried both warmth and authority. Please come in. Sarah Running Bear has told me much about you and this discovery you've made. Emma followed the elder into a living room decorated with beautiful examples of traditional Native American artwork. The walls were lined with photographs showing multiple generations of family members, and Emma could sense the weight of history and tradition that filled the space. Please sit down. Mary Bear Song gestured to a comfortable chair near the fireplace. Sarah tells me that you found our ancestors' meeting place with the help of an old map. But before we talk about that, I want to know about you. Tell me why you became interested in the study of old things. Emma found herself telling Mary Bear Song about her childhood fascination with historical objects, her university studies, and her early career in archaeology. When she reached the story of the Arizona incident, she hesitated, unsure how much detail to share. Sarah mentioned that you had some difficulties in your previous work, Mary Bear Song said gently. I would like to hear about that from you. Emma told the story of the broken ceremonial vessel and the aftermath that had driven her from academia. She tried to be honest about her role in the incident while also explaining what she had learned from the experience. Mary Bear Song listened without interruption, her expression thoughtful but unreadable. When Emma finished, the elder was quiet for several minutes before responding. 20 years ago, there were many archaeologists who thought they could study our ancestors without involving our communities in that work, she said finally. Some of them learned better ways, and some of them did not. The fact that you stopped your work when you realized you had made mistakes tells me something important about your character. Emma felt a wave of relief and gratitude. I spent 20 years feeling like my career had ended in failure. But maybe those years taught me things that will make me better at this work now. Perhaps they did. Now tell me about this place you have found and what you hope to learn from it. Emma shared the photographs and documentation from their forest expedition, explaining how they had used Captain Hartwell's map to locate what appeared to be a significant cultural site. Mary Bear Song examined each image carefully, occasionally asking questions about specific symbols or features. This place, the elder said, pointing to the cave entrance in one of Emma's photographs, this is what we call Kichi Wobanaki Aki, the place where the people gather. It appears in our stories about the time when our ancestors worked with some of the European visitors to preserve important knowledge. Emma's excitement was building. Are there specific stories about what happened at this place? There are stories about a time when some of the European explorers came not to take land or change our ways, but to learn from us and to work together to protect sacred places from those who would destroy them. The stories tell of a great hiding when our ancestors and their European friends worked together to preserve ceremonial objects and sacred writings in hidden places where they would be safe. Mary Bear Song stood and walked to a bookshelf, returning with a leather-bound notebook that looked very old. This belonged to my great-great-grandfather, Joseph Keeper. He could write in both our language and English, and he kept records of the work he did with the European explorer who made your map. Emma's hands trembled as she realized she was looking at the personal records of the same Joseph Keeper mentioned in Captain Hartwell's journals. Mary Bear Song. This could be one of the most important historical documents related to early cultural cooperation in this region. Yes, it could be. And that is why I wanted to meet with you before deciding whether to support your project. Joseph Keeper's writings tell us that there are sacred objects hidden in that cave, objects that were placed there for protection during a time when our people faced great pressure to abandon our traditional ways. The implications began to sink in. If the cave contained artifacts that had been deliberately hidden during the 19th century, they could be looking at a unique time capsule of Native American culture from a crucial period in the region's history. What would be the proper way to explore such a place? Emma asked, very carefully and with full understanding that we are not just looking for old things, but reconnecting with the spiritual and cultural heritage of our people. If we decide to proceed with this exploration, it must be done as a ceremony, not just as a scientific investigation. Mary Bear Song spent the next hour sharing stories from Joseph Keeper's notebook, translating sections that described the collaboration between Abenaki cultural leaders and Captain Hartwell. What emerged was a picture of remarkable cooperation between cultures at a time when such partnerships were rare and often dangerous for Native American communities. Joseph Keeper wrote that Hartwell was different from other European explorers, Mary Bear Song explained. He came to learn rather than to take, and he understood that our knowledge of this land was valuable and should be preserved. Together, they created hiding places for sacred objects and made maps that would allow future generations to find these places when the time was right. Emma realized that their discovery represented far more than just an archaeological site. It was evidence of a successful model for cross-cultural cooperation that had been largely forgotten by mainstream history. Mary Bear Song, if we proceed with exploring this cave, what would you want to see happen with any discoveries we make? I would want to see them treated as living parts of our cultural heritage, not just as museum artifacts. If there are sacred objects in that cave, they should be returned to our communities for proper care and ceremonial use. If there are writings or other records, they should be shared with our people, as well as with scholars who can help preserve and interpret them. Emma nodded, understanding that any exploration of the cave would need to be planned with the goal of cultural repatriation rather than academic acquisition. This was a very different model from the archaeology she had practiced 20 years earlier, but it felt more meaningful and ethically sound. I want to approach this project in whatever way your community thinks is most appropriate, Emma said. This isn't my discovery to control. It belongs to your people and to the history they've preserved through their oral traditions. Mary Bear Song smiled for the first time since Emma's arrival. Sarah Running Bear was right about you. I think you have learned the wisdom that makes good archaeology possible. We will support your project, but we will also participate in it as equal partners. As Emma prepared to leave, Mary Bear Song gave her a small leather pouch containing what she said were traditional blessing herbs. When you are ready to enter the cave, these will help ensure that your work is conducted with proper spiritual preparation. Driving back to Millbrook that evening, Emma reflected on how much her understanding of archaeology had evolved during her years away from the field. The project that lay ahead would be more complex and challenging than anything she had attempted in her previous career, but it would also be more meaningful and ethically grounded. Emma realized that her 20 years in exile from academia hadn't been a waste of time. They had been preparation for exactly this kind of work. She was ready to be an archaeologist again, but this time she would be practicing a different kind of archaeology, one that honored both scientific rigor and cultural wisdom. 3 weeks later, Emma stood in the parking area at the edge of the state forest, watching as members of their expanded team arrived and began unloading equipment from several vehicles. The group had grown to include Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a geoarchaeologist who specialized in cave environments, Dr. James Whitfield, a historian from Harvard who had studied Captain Hartwell's papers, David Bear Song, Sarah's cousin, and a trained archaeologist, 2 professional cavers, and 3 graduate students. Elder Mary Bear Song had arrived early, along with 2 other tribal elders who would conduct the ceremonial preparations necessary before entering the cave. Emma was honored that such respected community leaders had chosen to participate personally in their expedition. Before we begin any technical work, Mary Bear Song announced to the assembled team, we must acknowledge that we are entering a sacred space that has been protected by our ancestors for many generations. We will perform traditional ceremonies to ask permission for our work and to ensure that we approach this place with proper respect. The ceremonial preparations took nearly an hour and included the burning of sage and sweetgrass, prayers spoken in Abenaki, and the sharing of traditional foods that connected the participants to the land and their ancestors. Emma found the experience deeply moving and felt that it established exactly the right tone for their investigation. In our traditions, David Bearsong explained to the team members who were unfamiliar with indigenous protocols, we understand that places like this cave are alive with the spirits of our ancestors and the knowledge they preserved. We don't enter such places to take things, but to learn from them and to ensure that the wisdom they contain continues to serve our communities. As they prepared to hike to the cave site, Emma realized that this expedition represented a completely different approach to archaeology than anything she had experienced in her earlier career. Instead of viewing the site primarily as a source of data or artifacts, they were approaching it as a living part of ongoing cultural traditions. The hike to the cave took about an hour, following the trail that Emma, Tom, and Sarah had discovered on their initial reconnaissance. The professional cavers had gone ahead earlier in the morning to assess the safety conditions and install lighting systems that would allow the team to work effectively in the underground environment. When they reached the terrace area outside the cave entrance, Emma was struck once again by the power and beauty of the location. The natural amphitheater formed by the rock formations seemed designed for gatherings and ceremonies, and the petroglyphs around the cave entrance appeared even more impressive with the full team present to examine them. Dr. Martinez spent considerable time studying the geological context of the cave system before the team entered. This is a natural limestone cave that's been modified and expanded by human activity, she reported. The entrance has been enlarged and shaped, and there are clear signs of ongoing maintenance and use over extended periods. Dr. Whitfield was examining the petroglyphs with intense interest, comparing them to sketches and descriptions in Captain Hartwell's unpublished journals. These markings match Hartwell's documentation almost exactly, he told Emma, but there are additional symbols here that aren't in his notes, suggesting that the site continued to be used and modified after his time. The professional cavers emerged from the cave entrance and reported that conditions inside were safe for the full team to enter. They had installed battery-powered LED lighting systems throughout the accessible portions of the cave, and had identified several chambers that appeared to contain cultural features. The cave system extends back about 60 feet from the entrance, reported the lead caver, a woman named Lisa Chen. There are 3 main chambers connected by natural passages, and all of them show evidence of human modification and use. Emma took a deep breath as she prepared to enter the cave for the first time. 20 years earlier, she had lost her archaeological career because of a mistake made during an excavation. Now she was about to begin what could be the most important discovery of her life, and she was determined to handle it with the care and respect it deserved. Remember, she told the team as they gathered at the cave entrance, we're documenting everything in place before we move or remove anything. Our first goal is to understand how this space was used and what it can teach us about the people who created it. The cave entrance opened into a natural chamber about 20 feet wide and 12 feet high, with smooth limestone walls that showed evidence of both natural water action and human modification. The chamber was illuminated by the professional lighting system, revealing details that would have been invisible with ordinary flashlights. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she saw what the chamber contained. Along the walls were natural alcoves and ledges that had been modified to create storage spaces, and many of these spaces still contained objects that had been placed there decades or centuries earlier. Everyone stop and look around before we move any further, Emma instructed. We need to document the overall layout and context before we examine individual artifacts. Dr. Martinez began making detailed measurements and sketches of the chamber, while the graduate students photographed every visible feature from multiple angles. Emma found herself moving carefully around the space, trying to understand how it had been organized and used by the people who had created it. "Look at this," Sarah called softly from the far side of the chamber. "There's a natural spring here, and it's been modified to create a pool that would have provided fresh water for people using the cave." Emma joined Sarah at the spring and realized that they were looking at evidence of long-term occupation or repeated use of the cave space. The spring had been surrounded by carefully placed stones that created a clean water collection area, and there were grooves cut into the rock that would have directed the water flow. This suggests that the cave was used for extended ceremonies or gatherings, David Bearsong observed. Our ancestors would have needed reliable water sources for important spiritual activities that might last for several days. As they moved deeper into the cave system, Emma began to appreciate the sophistication of the modifications that had been made to the natural space. Passages had been widened to improve access. Chambers had been connected by artificial openings, and the entire system had been organized to serve specific functions. The second chamber was smaller than the first, but contained even more dramatic evidence of human activity. The walls were covered with petroglyphs that appeared to represent multiple time periods and cultural traditions, and the floor was marked with what appeared to be formal seating areas arranged around a central fire pit. This was definitely used for ceremonies and council meetings, David Bearsong said, as he studied the arrangement of the space. The seating pattern follows traditional protocols for important gatherings, and these petroglyphs record the decisions and agreements that were made here. Dr. Whitfield was comparing the cave paintings to descriptions in Hartwell's journals. Hartwell wrote about entering a council chamber decorated with the records of many generations, he read from his notes. This has to be the same space he was describing. But it was the third chamber that contained the most extraordinary discoveries. This deepest section of the cave had been carefully sealed with stone walls that incorporated both Native American and European building techniques. The professional cavers had found a hidden entrance behind what appeared to be a natural rock formation. "We need to be extremely careful as we enter this area," Emma warned the team. "If this chamber was deliberately sealed, there may be specific reasons why it was hidden, and we need to respect the intentions of the people who created these barriers." The sealed chamber was smaller than the others, but it had been designed specifically for storage and preservation. The walls were lined with carefully constructed alcoves, and many of these storage spaces were still sealed with stone slabs that bore petroglyphic markings. "This is exactly what Joseph Keeper described in his writings," Mary Bearsong said softly. "This is where our ancestors and their European friends hid the sacred objects and knowledge that needed to be protected." Emma felt a profound sense of awe as she realized they were looking at a 19th century time capsule that had been created specifically to preserve cultural knowledge during a period of enormous pressure on Native American communities. The collaboration between Captain Hartwell and Joseph Keeper had created something unique in the archaeological record, a site that documented successful cross-cultural cooperation rather than conflict and displacement. "How do we proceed from here?" Emma asked the group. "This is clearly one of the most significant cultural sites ever discovered in this region, but it also represents living heritage that belongs to specific communities." Elder Mary Bearsong spoke for the tribal representatives. "We need to open these storage areas carefully and document what our ancestors preserved here. But we also need to understand that this knowledge belongs to our people and should be shared with them before it's shared with the academic world." Emma nodded, understanding that they were participating in something far more significant than a typical archaeological excavation. They were helping to reconnect Native American communities with cultural heritage that had been hidden for protection and was now ready to be reclaimed by the people who had created it. "We'll proceed chamber by chamber, documenting everything in place before we remove or examine individual objects, Emma decided. And we'll make sure that tribal representatives have the opportunity to examine and interpret everything we find before any decisions are made about further study or preservation. The work of documenting and exploring the sealed chamber proceeded slowly over the following weeks. Each sealed storage area represented a decision made by Captain Hartwell and Joseph Keeper about what knowledge and objects were important enough to preserve for future generations. The first storage alcove they opened contained pottery vessels that appeared to be from multiple time periods and cultural traditions. Some were clearly Native American in origin, with traditional geometric designs. But others showed European influences, suggesting cultural exchange and adaptation. The second storage alcove yielded even more remarkable discoveries. Wrapped in carefully preserved hide bundles were written materials. Bark scrolls with indigenous pictographic writing, European-style paper documents, and what looked like bilingual texts that combined both writing systems. "This is extraordinary," Sarah said, as they carefully examined one of the bark scrolls. "These are traditional Abenaki historical records, but they've been supplemented with written notes in English that appear to be translations or explanations." Dr. Whitfield was equally excited by the European documents. These appear to be Captain Hartwell's field notes and correspondence, but they include extensive annotations in what must be Joseph Keeper's handwriting. They were collaborating to create bilingual records of their cultural exchanges. The third storage alcove contained objects that brought the spiritual and ceremonial dimensions of the site into sharp focus. Carefully wrapped in traditional materials were what appeared to be sacred items: carved pipes, medicine bundles, ritual tools, and objects whose significance would be best understood by the tribal cultural specialists. These are the kinds of objects that would have been hidden to protect them from destruction during times when our people were forbidden to practice traditional ceremonies, David Bearsong explained. By preserving them here, our ancestors ensured that future generations would be able to reconnect with spiritual practices that were being suppressed. But perhaps the most significant discovery came in the deepest section of the sealed chamber, where they found what appeared to be a joint statement written by Captain Hartwell and Joseph Keeper explaining their collaborative project. The document, written on European paper in both English and Abenaki, described their shared belief that cultural knowledge belonged to all humanity and should be preserved for future generations, regardless of political conflicts between their respective communities. "We have worked together," the English portion of the document read, "to create a repository of knowledge that represents the best of both our traditions. It is our hope that future generations will find in this place evidence that different peoples can learn from each other and preserve wisdom that benefits all communities." Dr. Whitfield was visibly moved as he read the document aloud to the team. This represents a vision of cultural cooperation that was far ahead of its time. Hartwell and Joseph Keeper were essentially creating a model for collaborative research that wouldn't become common in academic circles for another century and a half. Emma realized that their discovery had profound implications not just for understanding regional history, but for contemporary approaches to cultural preservation and collaboration. The cave represented proof that respectful partnership between different communities was possible and could produce results that benefited everyone involved. As they concluded their initial exploration, Emma felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this discovery. Her 20 years away from archaeology hadn't been a period of exile. They had been preparation for exactly this kind of culturally sensitive and collaborative work. The discoveries in the cave would require months of careful analysis and interpretation, but Emma already knew that they had found something that would reshape understanding of early American cultural history. More importantly, they had demonstrated that archaeological research could honor both scientific standards and indigenous values when conducted with proper respect and collaboration. Emma Peterson had returned to archaeology by discovering the work she was always meant to do: research that built bridges between communities rather than extracting knowledge from them. 3 months after their initial exploration of the cave, Emma found herself standing in the main auditorium of the State Historical Society, preparing to present their discoveries to the largest gathering of archaeologists, historians, and Native American cultural leaders ever assembled in the region. The presentation would mark the first public announcement of what was already being called one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in New England's modern history. The months since their cave exploration had been intensely busy as the team worked to analyze, document, and interpret their findings. Emma had temporarily closed Peterson's treasures to focus full-time on the research project, hiring her neighbor Janet Mills to handle any urgent antique business. The analysis phase had been as collaborative as the initial discovery. Tribal cultural specialists had worked alongside academic researchers to interpret the artifacts and documents, ensuring that indigenous perspectives were central to understanding the significance of the findings. "Emma, you look nervous," Tom observed as he joined her backstage before the presentation. "Are you ready for this level of public attention?" Emma smiled, feeling surprisingly calm despite the magnitude of the moment. "You know, Tom, I spent 20 years afraid of being judged by the archaeological community. But this discovery belongs to all of us: the tribal communities, the academic researchers, and the local people who've preserved the history of this region. I'm not standing up there alone." The presentation would be given jointly by Emma, Sarah, David Bearsong, and Dr. Whitfield, with each team member contributing their expertise to tell the complete story of their discovery. Elder Mary Bearsong would conclude the presentation by discussing the significance of the find for contemporary Native American communities. As Emma walked onto the stage and looked out at the packed auditorium, she saw faces that represented the entire spectrum of people who had been touched by their discovery. There were distinguished academics from major universities, tribal leaders from throughout New England, local community members from Millbrook, and reporters from regional and national media outlets. "Ladies and gentlemen," Emma began, her voice steady and confident. "3 months ago, our team discovered what we believe to be one of the most significant cultural sites in New England's recorded history. But more than that, we discovered a model for how archaeological research can honor both scientific rigor and indigenous knowledge systems." Emma outlined the story of their discovery, from Mrs. Hartwell's visit to her antique shop through their careful exploration of the cave system. She emphasized the collaborative nature of their work and the importance of tribal partnership in every phase of the project. "What makes this discovery unique," Emma explained, "is not just the artifacts and documents we found, but the evidence it provides of successful cultural cooperation during a period when such partnerships were rare and often dangerous for Native American communities." Sarah took over the presentation to discuss the archaeological significance of their findings. She described the pottery vessels that showed evidence of cultural exchange, the bilingual documents that recorded collaborative knowledge preservation, and the sacred objects that had been hidden to protect them during times of cultural suppression. "The artifacts we found represent a unique record of 19th century cultural adaptation and preservation," Sarah explained. "They show us how Native American communities maintained their traditions while also incorporating useful elements from European technology and knowledge systems." David Bearsong spoke about the significance of the discovery for contemporary Native American communities. "This cave represents our ancestors' wisdom in preserving cultural knowledge for future generations," he said. "The objects and documents hidden there have allowed us to reconnect with traditions and stories that were thought to be lost forever." Dr. Whitfield presented the historical context of Captain Hartwell's work and his collaboration with Joseph Keeper. What we see in the documentary evidence is a remarkable example of cross-cultural respect and cooperation, he explained. Hartwell approached Indigenous communities as equal partners in knowledge creation, rather than simply as subjects of study. The audience was clearly captivated by the presentation, and Emma could see the excitement and interest on faces throughout the auditorium. But she was most moved by the expressions of pride and recognition on the faces of the Native American community members in attendance. Elder Mary Bearsong concluded the presentation by placing the discovery in its contemporary cultural context. This cave was created by our ancestors who understood that knowledge belongs to all people and should be preserved for the benefit of future generations, she said. Today, we continue their work by sharing this discovery in a way that honors both scientific understanding and Indigenous wisdom. The question and answer session that followed was spirited and wide-ranging, with queries about methodology, cultural protocols, and the implications of their discoveries for understanding regional history. Emma was pleased that many of the questions focused on their collaborative approach and the lessons it might offer for future archaeological projects. Dr. Margaret Whitehorse, a prominent Native American archaeologist, stood up during the question period. Dr. Peterson, your team's approach to this project represents exactly the kind of culturally sensitive archaeology that our field needs more of. Have you considered developing this collaborative model into a formal program that could be replicated by other researchers? Emma looked out at the audience, seeing nods of agreement and interest from throughout the auditorium. Actually, that's exactly what we're hoping to do, she replied. We're in discussions with several institutions about creating a collaborative archaeology program that would train the next generation of researchers in culturally sensitive methodology. After the presentation ended, Emma was surrounded by colleagues, community members, and reporters who wanted to learn more about their discoveries and their collaborative approach. The attention was overwhelming but gratifying, representing a level of professional recognition that Emma had never imagined she might achieve again. Emma, this is incredible, said Dr. Robert Chen, a former colleague from her university days who had traveled from California to attend the presentation. You've not only made a major discovery, but you've pioneered a new model for how archaeological research should be conducted. Emma was particularly moved by the response from tribal community members who approached her to express their gratitude for the respectful way their heritage had been handled. You've shown that academic researchers can work with our communities as true partners, said one elder. This gives us hope for future collaborations. The media coverage of their discovery was extensive and largely positive, with articles appearing in major newspapers and archaeological journals. Emma found herself being interviewed by reporters who were as interested in the collaborative methodology as they were in the specific artifacts they had found. What's most significant about this discovery, Emma told a reporter from Archaeology magazine, is that it shows us a model for cultural cooperation that was successful nearly 2 centuries ago and can still guide our work today. Captain Hartwell and Joseph Keeper proved that different communities can learn from each other while respecting each other's values and knowledge systems. The weeks following the public announcement brought a flood of opportunities and invitations. Universities began reaching out to Emma about visiting professor positions and collaborative research opportunities. Museums expressed interest in developing exhibitions based on their discoveries. Publishers wanted to discuss book contracts about their work. But the opportunity that most excited Emma came from the university where Dr. Whitehorse taught. They offered her a position as the director of a new collaborative archaeology program that would train graduate students in culturally sensitive research methods while conducting ongoing projects in partnership with Indigenous communities. This would be a chance to institutionalize the approach you've developed and train the next generation of archaeologists in collaborative methodology, Dr. Whitehorse explained during their phone conversation. We're looking for someone who understands both the academic standards and the cultural protocols necessary for this kind of work. Emma was intrigued by the opportunity, but she also felt torn about leaving Millbrook and the life she had built there. "Can I have some time to think about this?" she asked. "This discovery has changed my life in ways I'm still processing, and I want to make sure I'm making the right decision for the right reasons." "Of course," Dr. Whitehorse replied, "but I hope you'll consider it seriously. What you've accomplished with this project represents the future of archaeological research, and we need people like you to help shape that future." As Emma considered the various opportunities that were opening up to her, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. 20 years ago, she had left archaeology in shame and failure, convinced that her career was over and that she had nothing meaningful to contribute to the field. Now she was being offered positions and recognition that exceeded anything she had achieved in her earlier career. But more important than the professional recognition was the sense of personal fulfillment she had found in conducting research that honored both scientific standards and cultural values. The collaborative approach they had developed for the cave project had shown her what archaeology could be at its best, a way of building bridges between communities and preserving knowledge for the benefit of all humanity. Emma decided to accept the position at the university, but with conditions that would allow her to maintain her connections to Millbrook and to continue the collaborative relationships they had built with tribal communities. She would spend part of each year teaching and developing the new program, and part of each year conducting field research using the methods they had pioneered. "I want to make sure this program trains archaeologists who understand that our work is not just about the past, but about building better relationships between communities in the present," Emma told Dr. Whitehorse when she accepted the position. "The cave discovery taught us that successful collaboration requires long-term commitment and genuine partnership, not just consultation." As Emma prepared to begin this new phase of her career, she reflected on the profound changes that had occurred in her understanding of what it meant to be an archaeologist. 20 years earlier, she had viewed archaeology primarily as a scientific discipline, focused on extracting and interpreting data about past cultures. Now, she understood it as a collaborative endeavor that could help contemporary communities understand their heritage and build stronger relationships with each other. The cave that Captain Hartwell and Joseph Keeper had created as a repository of shared knowledge had become a model for how different communities could work together to preserve and understand their common heritage. Their vision of cultural cooperation across ethnic and national boundaries had inspired Emma and her team to develop new methods for conducting research that honored both scientific rigor and cultural wisdom. As Emma stood in her antique shop for what might be the last time as its owner, she looked around at the objects and artifacts that had sustained her through 20 years of exile from archaeology. Each piece told a story about people who had valued beautiful and meaningful things enough to preserve them for future generations. In many ways, her work as an antique dealer had been preparing her for the collaborative archaeology she was now ready to practice. Emma realized that her journey from shame to redemption, from isolation to collaboration, had been necessary preparation for the work she was meant to do. The mistakes and failures of her earlier career had taught her humility and caution. The years of working with antiques had taught her patience and respect for cultural objects. The long period of exile from academia had given her perspective on what really mattered in archaeological research. Now, as she prepared to return to university life as a professor and program director, Emma felt ready to share what she had learned with a new generation of students. She would teach them not just the technical skills of archaeological research, but the cultural sensitivity and collaborative spirit necessary for working respectfully with living communities whose heritage they sought to understand. The cave discovery had given Emma back her career, but more importantly, it had given her a new understanding of what that career could be. She was no longer the ambitious young archaeologist she had been 20 years earlier, focused primarily on professional advancement and academic recognition. She had become something better, a scholar who understood that the most important discoveries were not just about the past, but about building bridges to a more collaborative and respectful future. 1 year after the cave discovery, Emma stood on the terrace outside the sacred site, watching as a group of Abenaki High School students carefully documented petroglyphs under the guidance of David Bearsong and one of her graduate students. The cave had become the centerpiece of an innovative educational program that brought together Native American youth, university students, and community members in collaborative learning experiences. The site itself had been designated as a protected cultural area, with access carefully managed to ensure both preservation and appropriate use for ceremonial and educational purposes. The artifacts discovered in the cave had been divided between tribal cultural centers and museum collections, with ongoing collaborative research projects continuing to reveal new insights about 19th century cultural cooperation. Emma's collaborative archaeology program had attracted students from around the world, all eager to learn the methods of culturally sensitive research that had been pioneered at the cave site. The program had become a model for other universities, and Emma found herself traveling frequently to consult on similar projects in other regions. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome of the discovery was the ongoing relationship between the university and regional tribal communities. The collaboration that had begun with the cave exploration had evolved into a comprehensive partnership that included language preservation projects, traditional ecological knowledge research, and cultural education programs. Dr. Peterson called one of the high school students, a young Abenaki woman named Rebecca Keeper, who was the great-great-great-granddaughter of Joseph Keeper himself. "Can you help us understand what this symbol means?" Emma walked over to where Rebecca was examining a particularly complex petroglyph, feeling the familiar thrill of discovery and interpretation that had drawn her to archaeology in the first place. But now that excitement was enhanced by the knowledge that her work was contributing to living communities and ongoing cultural traditions, rather than simply extracting knowledge for academic purposes. That's a spiral symbol that represents the cycle of seasons and the continuity of traditional knowledge, Emma explained, while David Bearsong added the cultural context that made the symbol meaningful within Abenaki spiritual traditions. As Emma watched Rebecca carefully document the petroglyph using techniques that combined traditional indigenous knowledge with modern archaeological methods, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The broken pottery vessel that had ended her first career had taught her the importance of careful supervision and cultural sensitivity. The 20 years of working with antiques had taught her patience and respect for objects that carried cultural meaning. The cave discovery had taught her that the most important archaeological work happened when different communities worked together as equal partners. Standing in the place where Captain Hartwell and Joseph Keeper had once collaborated to preserve knowledge for future generations, Emma understood that she had found her true calling. She was no longer an archaeologist who simply studied the past. She had become someone who helped build bridges between past and present, between different communities, and between academic knowledge and cultural wisdom. The cave would continue to yield insights and inspire new forms of collaboration for generations to come. But for Emma Peterson, it had already given her the greatest gift possible, the chance to rediscover her passion for archaeology while learning to practice it in ways that honored both scientific excellence and cultural respect. As the sun set over the forest, casting long shadows across the ancient petroglyphs and the faces of the students who were learning to interpret them, Emma felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her home to herself and to the work she was meant to do. The cave had revealed its secrets, but more importantly, it had revealed to Emma the archaeologist she was always meant to become. In the gathering twilight, as the students packed up their equipment and prepared to return to town, Emma took one last look at the cave entrance, with its mysterious symbols and hidden chambers. Tomorrow would bring new students, new discoveries, and new opportunities for collaboration. But tonight, she was content to stand in this sacred place and appreciate the remarkable journey that had led her from shame and exile to redemption and purpose. The weight of the past no longer pressed down on her shoulders. Instead, it had become the foundation for a future filled with possibility, partnership, and the kind of archaeological work that built bridges rather than barriers between the communities that shared this ancient land.